Hello everyone, my name is Heleen Toquet. I'm a visiting professor at the University of Antwerp and a voluntary fellow at KU Leuven. And you're listening to an episode of the podcast of the Forum on Central and Eastern Europe. And our guest today is Olivera Simic. Olivera is a scholar at Griffith University in Australia. And I met her through the work that I was doing on conflict-related sexual violence in the former Yugoslavia, and that is a topic that Olivera has also covered. And we're here today to talk about her work more in general, her books that she's written, a couple of amazing books that I recommend you to read. And Olivera's work has been mostly on the topic of transitional justice in the former Yugoslavia. And the first question I want to ask you, Olivera, is I think the way you are studying transitional justice is a bit different than the usual sort of way where people look at legalistic reform and, you know, all sorts of interventions from the top down, but you are unearthing bottom-up stories. So my question is, how does that work? How did you come to do that kind of work, and what does that add to how we interpret transitional justice?
So I've been always interested how what are the experiences of ordinary people, civilians during the war and after the war, and how they deal with some of the judicial and non-judicial mechanisms of transitional justice. So I was interested how judicial mechanisms such as trials or non-judicial mechanisms, truth negotiation commissions, impact on their life. What does that actually mean for them, and how they practice transitional justice? So I would call that practicing transitional justice on the ground. So how people who survived mass atrocities, victims of sexual violence or victims of torture, perceive transitional justice and how they practice transitional justice, meaning what do these processes mean to them and how they go through these processes. So it's really looking at, when we say transitional justice, it's a bit abstract term, but I'm trying to nail it down and to look at how people practice some of these mechanisms on the ground. So how they deal with the criminal proceedings or with the truth negotiation commissions. My work has been primarily in the Balkans region because I am originally from the Balkans, from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I also have experienced war, so that was kind of the trigger for me to delve into some of these experiences and explore more.
Thanks. I want to shift the focus to the book on Lola that you wrote. Lola is a survivor of conflict-related sexual violence. She's a Serbian survivor. These are women who do not usually get a lot of public attention or want to speak. How has your experience been writing that book sort of with her as well? Can you tell us something more about that?
The book Lola's War, Rape Without Punishment was published last year by Palgrave Macmillan, and it's something that I have done really first time, using a story of one woman. Usually I would interview more women or women and men and bring their experiences together. But this book is focused on the story of one woman. So I'm using her narrative to talk about transitional justice, criminal proceedings and reparations by using her narrative. So I met Lola a couple of years ago when I was asked by Gender Center in Republika Srpska to do the first study into Serb women victims of war experiences, because until that point in 2000, that was in 2015, Serb women victims were kind of pretty marginalized because they were just seen as extension of Serb perpetrators and war criminals, and as belonging to so-called perpetrator groups. So their experiences, even by feminist scholars and practitioners, have been completely neglected. So I was asked if I can bring some of these experiences to the fore and talk to some of these women about their experiences of transitional justice. And this is how I met Lola in that study when I did my fieldwork in 2014, and I met her and several other women. why I went back to her experience. And then I published a book about silenced victims of wartime sexual violence with Routledge in 2018, where I talk about her experiences and other women's experiences of sexual violence. And that book is really about why some narratives and why some women victims' narratives have been omitted from mainstream narratives about sexual violence in war, which was huge during the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I wrote about hierarchy of victimhood and really looking at the theories of hierarchy of victimhood and why some women have been omitted from the narratives around sexual violence in war. And one of the main arguments is that they haven't been seen as authentic victim. Ratna Kapoor uses this term, authentic victims, because of their perceived belonging to the perpetrators group, right? So I met Lola in around 2015, and then at that time she was the first woman to testify in the court, in the case before the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina for the crimes in Posavina, which is a region in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this was the first case where Serb women victims would testify about sexual violence committed against them, in her case by Croatian army. She was detained with her 3 kids in Croatian detention camp in 1992. At that time, she was going through criminal proceedings with no witness protection, and she was detained together with her sister. Just to cut the story short, her perpetrator, so there were 8 perpetrators in her case, only one was sentenced, but the first instance he was acquitted. And then there was appeal, and then he was sentenced in 2017 on 6 years in jail. At that moment when he was sentenced, and I was the last time in touch with her when there was appeal, and then he was sentenced, and then we lost the touch, and then sometimes in 2020 I got in touch with her for some other reason. And then I called her on a phone from Australia, and I just said, "How are you? What's going on?" I said, "Great, that he's finally, Ilija Juric, your perpetrator, has been sentenced," just to start conversation. And she said that he's in jail, and she said he has never been arrested. And I remember still, I was just really shocked, and I said, "What do you mean he was never been arrested? I thought he's sitting in jail." She said, No, he was never arrested, and he escaped, and we don't know where he is. This moment prompted me to start to do the research, to investigate. I was really interested, how is this possible that he was sentenced to jail and then that he now lives somewhere else? She already then assumed that he's in Croatia. So I started to do research, and then I found out more that he's not the only one, that there are around 200 war criminals who have been sentenced, but they escaped justice. Either they went to Croatia, to Serbia, some of them to Russia, and other places everywhere, even after they have been sentenced. So her perpetrator and rapist have been sentenced 6 years, but he is now living in Croatia, and we have evidence of that. The problem is that there is this extradition between Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia doesn't really work, that the governments protect their war criminals. So therefore he is still there, although there is an arrest warrant from the court of Bosnia and Herzegovina and also from the Interpol after him. But he hasn't been arrested yet, so now it's 2024, so it's almost 7 years since that moment when he was sentenced. So that prompted me to, I didn't plan to write a whole book, but then that happened, and then I did more talks with Lola about her experiences with the reparation programs and with the courts in Bosnia, and her life now when she knows that he's on the run.
So her experiences with transitional justice are totally negative.
If a victim has a perpetrator who was sentenced, and victim goes through a couple of years of these proceedings, and we all know how is that traumatic for victim, and out of 8 of them, 1 gets conviction, and even that one is not in the jail but somewhere in Croatia living his life, and we know that he lives quite a normal life because he is also on the Facebook. Lola can easily trace him down, as other women have traced them down, their perpetrators on the Facebook and other social media. She is very disappointed. She is very upset. She's also living in a fear that he may show up on her doorstep, because she still lives in this kind of the same area where she lived before the war, and that's quite close to Croatian border. So there is this, assumptions that he may cross the border by the river, illegally, of course, because he shouldn't be able to come legally into Bosnia, because he would be arrested. But there is a fear, and there is a question, why did I do this? Maybe she endangered more her life by going to testify, and she's a not good now role model for other women to be encouraged to go and testify, because they may end up maybe living with more fear than before. And also her kids, who are not kids anymore, but her kids were very reluctant for her to go into criminal proceedings. And you can imagine now, when this ended as it ended now, they all kind of are afraid. So we are talking about today. So she lives there, and she still she's waiting still for the justice.
And then you're saying this is not an unusual story, but because there are 150 similar cases.
Yeah, there are I can't say precise, so this is always a problem with the Bosnian courts and informations. It's very difficult to, get precise statistics, but between 150 and 300 people who are living their normal lives elsewhere, and who are either indicted, either convicted, or, in different stages, but they should definitely be arrested, or at least show before the court, but they are somewhere else living their lives. And some of them are not hiding, but they are just openly there, and you can easily trace them, which some of these women do. So no, she is not the only one. When she told me about this, I thought this is something exceptional, and that's like really... I should probably know better, because I've done so much research, but I was even surprised by this story, because this is not something that was publicly available everywhere, that these people are living somewhere else, or I was not focused. But anyway, at the end of the day, I met women who had that experience, and that gripped my attention as well. Like I said, how is this really, what does that mean for her to go through these proceedings and then end up empty-handed at the end of that?
Are the other 150 all people who have been convicted? Because there's also the people who getting indicted and then escape.
I think
how many would be?
Yeah, I think around 140 of them have escaped. So there is one article in media in our local languages that talk about that has also the list of these people. But was published once, and there is not much written about this. And then I talked to prosecutors and to NGO activists, and they, of course, know all about this. But prosecutors would say that their hands are tied, because Croatian government, Serbian government, other governments just protect the war criminals. They don't want to extradite, so they can't do anything. The most they can do, they just raise arrest warrants, and Interpol has arrest warrants for some of them, but then it's about the government to extradite them or to sentence them and prosecute them in their countries. But that doesn't happen, because we know that war criminals in most of these countries are seen not as war criminals, but war celebrities, right? They are very protected by the government and seen as a hero. So it's, and then we end up that these people have been living for years in a freedom, and even publicly expose themselves and being proud of their crimes, and their victims can watch all of that.
We're also, when we're talking about Croatia, talking about an EU member state that is protecting war criminals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you would expect that Croatia, as an EU member, should cooperate and align with all human rights standards and other standards in terms of criminal justice, but that doesn't happen. So there are numerous evidences where these war criminals are protected and supported, and some of them show up with the government in big celebrations, anniversaries, and who knows what. So, and obviously there is this case, at least with the lawless perpetrator, that he's there. So we all know that he is there. He has his Facebook. He uploads his photos, where you can see the date and where he is, but no one is doing anything. I heard that there were some moves by the Bosnian prosecutors to try. Of course, they try. They say you should do something, but they do not.
You mentioned also the perpetrators who are celebrated as heroes who have their own television programs and so on. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's something that's actually that interest into Facebook and social media and media has been triggered by Lola's story. But even before that, I edited with Barbora Hall a special issue where we looked at how these people who were convicted war criminals live after the sentence, was their post-sentence life. And what we discovered in 2018 is that most of them were welcomed in the country, like as they were coming from some torture camp rather than from jail, where they served their sentences for crimes against humanity and genocide and war crimes. And most of them high-ranking people who were generals, politicians, president like Biljana Plavšić, have been given space in the public to talk and openly deny their crimes and justify why they did what they did, and also to say that they would do all the same again. And many of these war criminals, prosecuted war criminals, are running the shows on the TV, telling to hundreds of thousands of people that they have done nothing wrong, and that's all some kind of conspiracy by the West against them and Serbs. So I was just like 3 days ago, I was in Bosnia, and I watched one of them giving some sort of political analysis around Ukraine and Russia. So these people are just present everywhere. So what we discovered a few years ago with the Barbora Hola, that they write memoirs and books, that's now exacerbated. I think there are hundreds of books published by war criminals, and also these book launches have been organized in the institutions of the government, and financed by them as well.
And Olivera, your new book is a biography of Biljana Plavšić. How did you start to work on that? And are you contributing to celebrating war criminals by authoring a book with them?
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument always, but I think that's kind of now a bit conservative to say, like, if people say, why do you give space to war criminals to tell their story? They shouldn't, been given microphone to tell. Biljana Plavšić was the vice president, so first next to Radovan Karadžić during the war, and she was also president of Republika Srpska. She is the only woman prosecuted by the ICTY. She is in many senses the first woman in detention, first woman prosecuted by the ICTY, first woman, really high-ranking woman, politician, former professor. She was one of us. She was the dean of University of Sarajevo science faculty. She was one of the most favorite teachers, got numerous awards for teaching. Very intellectual, highly intellectual. And then she, when war started, she became a member of the Nationalist Party of Radovan Karadžić, and she left her university position and became full-time politician. She ended up, after she was vice president, and then after the war she was a president of Republika Srpska, and then she was indicted and went to The Hague in 2001 in January, and then she was prosecuted for on 11 years of sentence for crimes against humanity. She was also prosecuted for genocide, but then there was a plea bargain, and then they dropped that.
So tell us about, what day did you wake up and think, I will do a biography of Biljana Plavšić?
Mm-hmm. So that interest to do, there was no plan to do a biography and book on Biljana Plavšić. There was only plan to publish one article for that special issue that I mentioned on ICTY celebrities that we did, and I had some personal connections, and I knew that I can get in touch with Biljana Plavšić. And I was very reluctant because I never, I grew up in Bosnia. I was 19 when war started. I knew very well who was Biljana Plavšić. I didn't like what she had to say. She was a right-wing nationalist always. I never had any interest to interview perpetrators, and I never had any inclination to sit down for 5 years and do interviews with Biljana Plavšić, but then I ended up doing that and having a lot of materials and her story about why she has done what she has done. Of course, she has stayed unremorseful, and she said many times that she would do the same again. The main reason for that is that she goes back to Second World War and what her family has survived during that war, and she thinks that that's just this war, as you probably would heard from most Serbs, that this is a continuation of genocide against Serbs that was done during the Second World War. So, and that she hasn't been in any of the meetings where major decisions were made, but her role was humanitarian. She's now 94. She still lives in Belgrade, and she's still convinced that she has done nothing wrong, that the only thing that she has done is to protect her people.
When is the book coming out?
That's a good question. I don't know. But the book is done. So I'm looking carefully for a publisher who is open to be flexible with the book cover, and I want to include some photographs of her because it is, at the end, it is like historical biography. And she is quite significant in terms of she is the first woman ever, actually, first woman high-ranking politician and president prosecuted before international criminal tribunals in the history. So
we'll have to keep an eye on your socials to know when it is coming out,
Yeah.
but hopefully soon. Sounds very, very interesting, and hopefully we can do another episode once I've read the book.
Sure.
Thank you, Olivera.
Thank you.